I believe that's go. So without further ado, go ahead, Mandy.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to July's Thought Leadership Circle Members Thought Leadership Learning Series. As Nicole mentioned, my name is Mandy Price. I'm Anishinaabe Kwe. I belong to the Red Rock Indian Band, signatories to the Robinson Superior Treaty of 1850. I am Ojibwe on my mother's side, Cree on my father's side. I am a first-generation residential school survivor, as well as a first-generation day school survivor in my family. Currently have my MBA from Western Governors University, as well as I am a PhD candidate for the Business and Management Leadership Program. With that, I would like to acknowledge my traditional territory. As mentioned, I'm from the Red Rock Indian Band, who are signatories of the Robinson Superior Treaty of 1850. I would like to acknowledge Canada as the land of the First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. And I recognize this land that is shared through historic treaties, developed through contemporary treaties, and land that continues to be unceded territory today. As mentioned, I am working on my PhD, so I am speaking to you this afternoon from the Choctaw Nation found here in Texas, Oklahoma, in the United States of America. About Indigenous works. We came out of the recommendation in the 1996 report on the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples. Our mandate is to increase Indigenous engagement in the Canadian economy. We are an award-winning, ISO-certified national Indigenous organization with expertise in workplace employment, corporate Indigenous engagement, and partnership systems. In 2015, we launched our Cochita charity with mandate to increasing the human resource and career potential of Indigenous youth, including those youth with disabilities. We have also launched our Luminary project, which has the purpose of advancing Indigenous innovation. Today's webinar objectives, we're going to have an overview of the history and origins of Two-Spiritedness. We're going to discuss appropriate terminology within the Two-Spirited community and roles within the culture and tribal structures. The definition of Two-Spirited. They can commonly be known as Two-Spirit, Two-Spirited, 2S. It is a modern, pan-Indigenous umbrella term. In our culture, it is that typically describes a traditional third gender. Two-spirited people have both a male and female spirit within them. The origins. The Two-Spirited existed in Indigenous culture and communities for generations. In Native American culture, before the Europeans came to the Americas, Two-Spirited referred to an ancient teaching. Therefore, the term and identity of Two-Spirit does not make sense unless it is contextualized within a Native American framework. While the word Two-Spirited person is an English moniker, it is a Native tradition that researchers have identified in some of the earliest discoveries of Native artifacts. We predate the LGBTQ terminology. The term was created in 1990 at the 3rd Annual Intertribal Native American, First Nations, Gay and Lesbian American Conference held in Winnipeg, Manitoba. It replaced an outdated and offensive anthropological term, Bertiche, which translated to kept boy. The history of Two-Spirited people have a long history on Turtle Island. Much evidence indicates that Native people, prior to colonization, believed in the existence of cross-gender roles, male-female, the female-male, what we now call the Two-Spirited person. This type of cross-gender identity has been documented in over 155 tribes across Native North America. Many tribes also had rituals for children to go through if they were recognized as acting different from their birth gender. These rituals ensured the child was truly two-spirit. If parents noticed that a son was disinterested in boyish play or manly work, they would set up a ceremony to determine which way the boy would be brought up. They would make an enclosure of brush and place in the center both a man's bow and a woman's basket. The boy was told to go inside the circle of brush and to bring something out, and as he entered the brush, it would be set on fire. The tribe watched what he took with him as he ran out, and if it was with the basketry materials, they reconciled themselves to his being a berdache. This was what Roscoe had observed in 1988. In another ritual, usually carried out when the child is between the ages of 9 and 12, that helped identify a child's two-spirit nature. A singing circle would be prepared, unbeknownst to the boy or child, involving the whole community as well as distant friends and relatives. On the day of the ceremony, everyone gathered around and the boy was led into the middle of the circle. If he remained in the center, the singer, hidden in the crowd, began to sing the ritual songs, and the child was destined to follow the two-spirited road and starts to dance in the fashion of a woman. After a fourth song, the child was declared a two-spirited person and was raised from then on in the appropriate manner. Male-bodied were often healers, medicines, burials, oral traditions, arts, and visionaries. Female-bodied were chiefs, council members, traders, hunters, trappers, fishers, and went on peace missions, as well as prophets within the tribal structure. Two-spirit is not an interchangeable term with gay. While there are many parallels and intersections, it is a same-sex attraction compared to an embodiment of two genders within one body. Two-spirited people may be gay, but gay does not necessarily mean two-spirited. Two-spirited people have a spiritual responsibility to the red road within Indigenous culture. The Creator gave each person and culture a road to walk: red, white, yellow, or black. The Anishinaabe people were given red. This means that they had a deep commitment to living life the best way possible. It is based on our clan system, and thought and knowledge are at the core values of this system. Two-spirited is significant importance because of the embodiment. Roles within the tribal structure. As mentioned before, the rituals previously determined if the person was two-spirited and taught young boys to do women's work in addition to that reserved for men. Similar rituals applied to the woman. Children of both genders would also spend time with the healers, often two-spirited people themselves. Above all, their childhood was marked by acceptance and understanding by the whole tribe. Multi-gendered adult people were usually presumed to be people of power because they have both maleness and femaleness totally intertwined in one body. They were known to be able to see with the eyes of both biological men and biological women. They were often called upon to be healers, mediators, interpreters of dreams, or expected to become singers or others whose lives were devoted to the welfare of the group. If they did extraordinary things in any aspect of life, it was assumed that they had the license and power to do so, and therefore they were not questioned. It is not a colonized definition. It does not fit into the standard definition of the LGBTQ. This is why the two that has recently been added to the LGBTQ plus stands for two-spirited. As we begin to bring forth and create an understanding of the great diversity of genders in Native American cultures and the ways in which sexuality influenced the performance of gender roles, we are drawn back to the original pre-colonial rituals. However, the inner calling of contemporary two-spirited people is often mixed in with modern understandings of sexuality, thus creating a perception that homosexuality was well accepted in pre-colonization instead of recognizing that these homosexual behaviors were accepted under the role of gender identity and based in spiritual rituals. Arguably, culture is not static and thus evolves and incorporates all the experiences of life. Therefore, today, the modern movement of reclaiming two-spirited traditions incorporates sexual orientation and sexual identity. The effects of colonization. Two-spirited people were victims of homophobia, exclusion, violence, and death. Settlers viewed them as less than human and in need of salvation. They were often ostracized, shamed, and considered an abomination. Brutality was used as a form of extermination. They faced political stigma and lateral oppression. The traditional roles were eradicated, and the culture went underground to avoid persecution. Since European colonization, the existence of the two-spirited community has been systematically denied and alienated from their Indigenous identities. As a result, two-spirited people are often viewed as perverted, untraditional, or untrustworthy, and have lost their place in society and their dignity. Persecution began by the church in an attempt to eradicate the two-spirited people. Often our spiritual leaders and healers of the tribes had to submit to the church's moralistic code and resulted in the loss of many rituals, including those who identified and honor cross-gender individuals. With very few exceptions, there is no longer a place in Indigenous cultures for a man-woman or a woman-man. The tribes have forgotten the two-spirit teachings, and many of the ancient two-spirit ways are no longer being practiced. Instead, their role appears as a ghost of the past or a dirty secret. Elders who may know the stories and teachings are often afraid to talk about them because of their experiences in residential schools and other forms of colonization. Because so many Native American cultures were disrupted or had disappeared before they were studied by researchers, it is not possible to know how frequently these spiritual ceremonies happened or all the roles ascribed to the two-spirited people. These alternative gender roles that have been documented, however, occur in every region of the continent, lending credibility to the claim that acceptance of two-spirited people was relatively common among Native American cultures. Today we have to confront a very real problem. It is impossible to define precisely what two-spirit experience was. Although most now agree that such individuals existed, the particulars of that identity remain, for most part, a ghost of history. Nonetheless, like many Native American rituals and traditions, the two-spirited peoples are experiencing a reawakening to the validity of their cultural and spiritual roots. The term is only appropriate for Indigenous people. It is a role that has mentioned that existed in Native American, First Nations, and Indigenous tribes. It is a term for genderqueer, gender fluid, or non-conforming members of the tribe. It was specifically chosen to distinguish and distance Native American, First Nations people from non-Indigenous people. If you do not belong to a tribe, you should not claim the title. I'd like to share with you a video of Dr. Myra Laramie. She was the woman who coined the term Two-Spirited at the conference in 1990.
Bonjour, Lendsay. Niu gabui Indigenous class. Masquane totem. O Gijitakway Indigenous class. I come from a place in Manitoba that has carried a very, very, very large body of Indigenous people from all over Canada. And that's the city of Winnipeg. The Niju Manituk, as we say in Anishinaabe, that was how that name was given to me. And it's taken its own journey actually around the world. And there are a number of us who want to slow down, come back, and to be able to bring an understanding and not a definition, because it cannot be defined. The grandfathers came in a dream. The grandmothers showed all of us the gift and the greatness of Two-Spirit. One day, or one night actually, 7 orbs of light as I was standing out on the grass. It was like the teepee disappeared and everything that, except the tobacco in my hand and the way in which I could see them through those legislature lights. They came, one after the other, 7 of them. And each time one came, there was a male face and a female face that would transform back and forth. And the first time the grandpa came, the mushum face came, he said, "You are as of us. You are one of us. And you have been here like us since the beginning of time. And you have come to know which way and how we travel the earth and the sky world and the spirit world." And he said, you will begin to know many different kinds of things about the Two-Spirit nation. It's a nation of many means and many gifts and many ways. But the easiest and the best way is to see that your gift is to see the world always in 2 sights, with 2 feelings of the heart. It's neither male or female, but it's both. It's neither up or down, but it's in the middle. It's complex. It's a complex understanding, but it's a real understanding if you just let yourself simmer down and not try to be something you're not. And so in that engagement of spirit and heart, we will always know who we are. It will never be taken away from us again, ever, 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 ever.
One more slide, I thought this would be beneficial to the group, is this kind of explains everything that we had discussed today from the perspective of the Two-Spirited person.
All right, let me just read it really quick. Two-Spirit, one more time. Though the label has only been used since the 90s, the concept of the Two-Spirit is something Indigenous groups have identified with for centuries. But what does Two-Spirit actually mean, and where does it come from? So what is Two-Spirit? It's an umbrella term that bridges Indigenous and Western understandings of gender and sexuality. You may recognize it as the two that sometimes appears on the end of LGBTQ2. There are many definitions and understandings of Two-Spirit, and each is nation-specific. The term was intentionally introduced by Native people with the goal of finding common ground and helping educate about traditional teachings in a contemporary context. The Two-Spirit Society of Denver offers the following definition. Two-Spirit refers to another gender role believed to be common among most, if not all, First Peoples of Turtle Island, North America. One that had a proper and accepted place within Native societies. This acceptance was rooted in the spiritual teachings that say all life is sacred. So how did the term Two-Spirit first come about? In 1990, in Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada, at the 3rd Annual Native American Gay and Lesbian Gathering, the term Two-Spirit was proposed and affirmed by consensus. The word was a potential solution to what Native scholars and activists called the problem of naming, or making the many different sexual and gender identities that fall under the Two-Spirit umbrella legible across Native and non-Native cultures alike. For example, to illustrate the diversity of meanings that Two-Spirit contains, consider the following. In Lakota, the word winkte means to be as a woman and refers to two-souled Lakota people who transgress boundaries of gender from what may be considered male to female. In Dene, nadlehe means those who transform and refers to one of 4 separate genders: masculine-feminine, masculine-masculine, feminine-masculine, and feminine-feminine. Each gender has its own word in the Dene language. And those are just 2 nation-specific examples. There are so many more. Each nation's understanding of gender and sexual diversity is different and grounded in specific spiritual beliefs. Although all nations don't have a concept of Two-Spirit people, across those Indigenous nations that do, Two-Spirit people were historically held in high regard and often considered sacred or divine, holding important positions like matchmakers, medicine people, or warriors on the front lines of battle. Many Two-Spirit people perform roles traditionally assigned to both men and women. Witwa, a famous Two-Spirit of the Zuni or Ihamana, was known to take part in masculine tribal matters and feminine tribal matters, and was even sent as an official Zuni delegate to Washington, D.C. Part of the reason Two-Spirit was adopted at the 1990 conference was because much of the written record on the Indigenous nations of North America begins with European contact. For instance, the writings of Jesuit priests from the 1600s contain references to berdaches, which means kept boy in French, to refer to those who embodied both male and female genders. These writings often focus negatively on perceived cross-dressing among the Anishinaabe. The term is not only inaccurate in that it projects a European understanding of gender, but is widely considered pejorative by natives. Two-Spirit was an attempt at self-determination across linguistic barriers, because the existing language, foreign and imposed violently on the Indigenous peoples of North America, was both offensive and deeply colonial in its gaze. European colonizers imposed homophobia, rigid binary gender roles, and misogyny under the guise of civilizing Indigenous people through the Christian tradition in residential schools and beyond. As a result, Indigenous people were robbed not only of their land, but of their spiritual traditions and way of life regarding Two-Spirit people. Many nations came to forbid and punish Two-Spirit unions and self-expression. As recently as 2004, Kathy Reynolds and Dawn McKinley, 2 Cherokee women in Tulsa, Oklahoma, attempted to marry under tribal law, setting off a convoluted legal battle with serious political and social implications. The 2 were thrust into the spotlight against their wishes and became instant public symbols of the battle for Two-Spirit rights under tribal law. The Cherokee tribe is the 2nd largest in the U.S. Although they were granted the right to marry, the decision to issue them a marriage license was soon challenged and led to a tribal law declaring that a union was to be between a man and a woman. Eventually, in 2016, the law was overturned. By that time, a wider cultural shift had taken place, both outside of and within the Cherokee Nation. In recent years, many Native people are returning to their Two-Spirit traditions as a way to heal from the injustices the American colonial project has visited upon their ancestors and traditions. In 2011, the first known U.S. Two-Spirit powwow was organized by the Bay Area American Indian Two-Spirits. Since then, powwows honoring Two-Spirits have been held in Montana and Kansas. And in March of 2017, the largest powwow in the U.S., the Gathering of Nations, honored Two-Spirit people during its grand entry. Two-Spirit identity is resilient and precious. It has survived centuries of colonial violence and prejudice. These sacred ways of knowing live on amongst Native youth seeking to know more about themselves, elders who have kept the traditions alive in spite of the odds, and anyone in between. It should go without saying, but Two-Spirit is not a poetic way for non-Native LGBTQ people to express themselves. We're looking at you, Jason Mraz. It is, however, a sacred tradition among the first peoples of this land we call Turtle Island that all of its inhabitants should know about and respect.
With that, I would like to send out a huge team wedge to Sandy Leo Laframboise. There was our knowledge creator. She is an Algonquin Cree Métis Two-Spirited elder living in Vancouver, BC. I've left her email up as a point of contact should anybody have any further questions. She is a great resource. She's a teacher. And with that, the next Thought Leadership Learning Series is on August 25th, and it is going to be on understanding and honoring National Truth and Reconciliation Day. If you have any further questions, comments, please send your ideas or knowledge topics to contact us at indigenousworks.ca or Mandy P at indigenousworks.ca.
So we can open the floor now to conversation and questions. One item of interest specifically regarding Sandy Laframboise is Indigenous Works is in the process of developing and fleshing out some training and more kind of webinar and course sections related to her areas of expertise. So specifically Two-Spirit, as well as elder research, consensus and consent-based research, and particularly in the medical space. So keep your eyes peeled for more information about that as it comes out. And then I'm watching the chat now. Tiffany, yes, we will be sharing the PowerPoint. And yes, the recording, it either goes out to every, oh yeah, there's Subhash. The PowerPoint deck as well as the video. Yes, once it gets processed, it gets sent out to everybody. How do we, so the link to register for August 25th is up on the website. I'll dump it into the chat as well. Also of note, the August offering for the webinar is going to be about truth and reconciliation. And then we also are doing 3 additional truth and reconciliation related sessions on the 7th, the 14th, and the 21st. We will be sending information out about that to the Leadership Circle members. And then we will be closing our reconciliation offering with our September webinar during this normal time. More information will be coming out for that. But we've had so many questions and so much kind of organizations and businesses have been coming to us seeking more information regarding truth and reconciliation. So we've expanded our offering, and as well as many organizations are kind of doing something in-house as well. What is the best way to find about these traditions specific to the traditional territory we live on? Kim, I will flag that for follow-up. Could you send me an email to Nicole at Nicole Heska so that I know how to email you back about that? let's see. Then I see Ishma, informative session, newcomer to Canada. I got a clear understanding. That's wonderful. Justine, since the two-spirit definition fits outside the gender binary, would some two-spirit people ever consider themselves transgender as well? This is also outside of my area of expertise, and likewise probably Mandy's, but Mandy, if you have something to contribute to that, you're welcome to. Alternatively, please send me that question to my email. So Subhash just put the next leadership webinar in. I'll put my email address in again, and we can see if we can get an answer to your question, Justine. So Nicole H at indigenousworks.ca. There we
Okay,
go.
let's see Mandy here.
Perfect. Eva, thank you for identifying and offering that. Wonderful. And welcome. And we can wait a little longer, see if there's anything. Feel free to raise your hand or unmute yourself if you have another question.
Okay, there is a question from Ola.
Mm-hmm.
Not a question, but yeah.
I would say that asking on behalf of a couple of my staff. Okay, Jan, I'll get to yours. So while I can't give specific reference to Two-Spirit on other continents, the colonially imposed gender binary that exists in our wider community in North America, I know that there are many examples of traditional cultures that didn't adhere to that in the same way.
And think back to the teachings as well, as the term Two-Spirit was specifically coined for Native North American people as well. So we would look at it, through the context of, transgender, non-binary. So there would be in other research, but they would not be referred to as two-spirited people.
Jan, asking on behalf of a couple of the staff, term would be appropriate for non-Indigenous person who self-identifies having equally masculine. Do you have something to offer on that, Mandy?
No, I do not. That is,
Yeah,
my scope of expertise.
I would say that generally in situations like that, from a diversity, equity, and inclusion perspective, is you go with what that person identifies with. So that person's term, this is a situation where I find that meeting people as people first, and then kind of their professional avatar after is important, because then we get to have these conversations. And while it isn't necessarily, well, it is definitely not the responsibility of individuals to teach, it is our responsibility to listen when they kind of identify specifically in these contexts.
Yeah. Further to that, Nicole, just through the lens of DEI as well, is where we get into which pronouns the person prefers. That's one of the things that we do in inclusion, is making that available, say through an email signature, what their pronouns are. Many have started using on virtual meeting platforms such as Zoom and Microsoft Teams, that they will put their pronouns on their names, so you refer to them she, her, he, they, them, is a way of working around that as well.
Mandy, we have one more question. Would Two-Spirit be similar to someone who identifies as non-binary, or is non-binary strictly a North American terminology and would not apply?
So there certainly are, again, parallels and intersections, but Two-Spirit, again, is specifically for the Indigenous communities, but somebody who identifies as neither, female or male, whereas Two-Spirit is the embodiment of both a male and a female spirit.
And it definitely has that spiritual layer to it, I would say, whereas a non-binary rests more on just the gender aspect of it. The Two-Spiritedness, from my understanding, is it's the male, female, masculine, feminine with the divinity layer into it, and it is more interpreted as gifts that come through this in the wider context of Indigenous community as well, and what perhaps having that particular lens of being able to navigate across both can bring to the community from as a perspective. So we do have 19 more minutes, but the chat has slowed down, and about 40 people have left the session so far. Is there anything else that anybody would like to bring up? We are available. You can wait until more people leave the chat if you're feeling as though you want to ask, or otherwise everyone is free to go.
No, Nicole, you can talk a little bit about September, why we are doing this webinar in August, and then, yeah.
Absolutely. Okay, just let me bring it up. So, so for Truth and Reconciliation, we had so many requests come in that we wanted to expand our offering. So as per usual, on August 25th at 1 p.m. Eastern is Indigenous Works Monthly Thought Leadership Webinar. This will be about understanding and honoring National Truth and Reconciliation Day. And then separate from our thought leadership webinars is a September 7th offering from noon to 1 p.m. Eastern. This will be an hour-long presentation, including a Q&A along the same structure as this one, regarding a topic pertaining to reconciliation. We're still trying to narrow down what we feel would be the best. There's 3 or 4 that are still being discussed. And then September 14th from 12 to 1 Eastern, same thing, an hour-long presentation like this with a Q&A about a topic. And then September 21st, from 12 to 1 p.m. Eastern, we are hosting a courageous conversation about reconciliation, and it will be a panel conversation with Indigenous thought leaders, and it's sponsored by Bell. And we will be sending out more information and ways to register for all of these things. But while I would suggest that all of them are useful and interesting, these panel conversations are absolutely fascinating as a viewer to watch. It's not a slide deck and a Q&A after, but it is an opportunity to listen to 3 voices share ideas, and it's really dynamic, and people who attend them just really enjoy it. And then September 29th is back to our normal monthly thought webinar series, and that's at 1 p.m. Eastern. And the topic for that is bringing reconciliation into your business.
Yeah, so if we will not have any more question, we'll wrap it up soon. Okay, some question there. Okay. From Angie, from Economical Insurance.
Hi, Angie. This would be something that you would specifically kind of explore within the context of your organization, because there is, you don't want, and if this is something that you want to consider, perhaps send me an email. We can book a meeting and discuss it. If this is something that you want to prioritize, it would be something that we would address with Sandy in a consultation context, because when we develop these things, it has to be very cognizant of what the internal communications and culture is inside your organization, and how also you would want to communicate that externally, and we have to make sure that we aren't kind of using tokenism, and that we aren't putting the burden on any Two-Spirit individuals who might be already inside your organization to do the teaching, right? So we have, it's a complex question, and we would have to sit down and kind of have a more fulsome conversation about it. But feel free to send me an email, and we can pull together our knowledge keepers and find out a way to make a solution for your organization. Okay, wonderful. Then we have the gift of time, 15 minutes. Everybody have a wonderful day, and thank you again for attending, and the best to you and yours. We absolutely love these monthly meetings, and they're great. Bye, everybody.
Much, everyone.